here in just a second. All right, so as I was saying, my name is Ted Pavlic. I'm an instructor of SOS 212, Systems Dynamics and Sustainability for this spring 2021 semester. And the TA for this course is Eric Vahid, who is a PhD student here in the School of Sustainability. Eric, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Eric. As Ted said, I'm a PhD student in the School of Sustainability. I did the MSUS in the School of Sustainability before my PhD, and I have a bachelor's degree from University of California, Irvine, in Earth System Science with a minor in sustainability. And I'm looking forward to working with you guys this semester. I'm here virtually for this class, but normally, so starting Thursday, I'll be in class in person for anyone who would like or who needs to attend the class in person. So I'll be there to set everything up and answer any questions or help with anything in person for that. Yeah, I have office hours for anyone who would like to come to that for any help or any questions about any material or so I believe those are going to be Friday mornings. For now, it will be Friday mornings from 10 to 12, and that will most likely be what my office hours would be for the rest of the semester. So yeah, if anyone has any questions or anything, feel free to reach out, and I look forward to working with everyone.
Thanks, Eric. And so I've put my contact info up here, but as I'll go into in a moment here, the Canvas site, which I've just published before this class, also has instructional information about Eric and me both, and so you can find our contact information there. Technically, I do have an office on campus, but this is sort of the Zoom modality this semester for me, and so preferred contact will be over email or coming to my office hours. I haven't set my office hours formally yet, but I'm planning on Monday and Tuesday. Tuesday right after this class, say at 4:30 for an hour, and then Monday, say at the same time at 4:30 for an hour. That's my tentative schedule, and once that finalizes, I'll put that up on the website as well. So let's maybe get into it here. What is this class all about? This class is helping us to think about dynamics. And so dynamics are processes that stimulate change over time. And so there's this nice little diagram here of this sapling growing into what will someday be much bigger here. And so we kind of know that this isn't terminal growth. We know that there are certain processes that go into going from a seed up until this stage. And by understanding the fundamental processes of this growth, we can actually make guesses as to what's going to happen next. And those things that help us make these guesses are models. And that's what we learn to build in this course, is models that help us understand, given that we basically know the rough idea of what's going on inside a process, when we put all of those things together, then how will these models help us get a better idea of what might happen in the process if we make an intervention, or what might happen in the process if we just let it going and thinking into the future. And so, well, a lot of times when people think about dynamics, they use mathematical models, like things that use constructs that you might have seen if you're a sustainability student in SOS 211, or if you're one of our students who's here from another program in your first calculus course. So maybe an expression like this one over here on the left, this sort of dy dt equals 5y. Now, you might not remember all of what's going on there, and that's fine, and we'll get into that, but just fundamentally, this is the typical way we model dynamical processes, by using equations like this here on the left. And then, as you learned in your first calculus class, you learn all sorts of interesting techniques to then maybe by hand solve this thing and turn it into an expression like this thing over here on the right. And so that was kind of, the guts of, again, your first calculus class, is figuring out the mechanics of, if I was given an expression like that, how do I turn it into this expression over here on the right? And in theory, you could plot that thing, and maybe it would look a little bit like this line that I have growing above here, above this plant. And so calculus provides us methods for solving these. Given that we start with one of these things, how do we get to this thing over here? But the harder problem often is, how do we start with one of those things to begin with? And some of you may have taken courses in systems thinking already. If not, that's fine. We go over that in this course. But basically, systems thinking is another set of methodologies that's a little more qualitative. It's not quantitative like the way we think of calculus is. And systems thinking basically allows us to do the bookkeeping of saying that what's going on in this process? Well, there's sunlight that's in this process. There's water that's in this process. There's nutrients in the soil. There's access to the canopy. There are all sorts of these things that can possibly be driving the growth of this little plant. And if we understand all of those things and how they come together, then we might start getting a better idea of that, oh, if I cut off the sunlight a little bit, then we might expect this to happen. If I dump in more nutrients, we might expect this other thing to happen. If I do both of those things, they might counterbalance. And that counterbalancing effect might not be shown in the plant, but we now know, because we have now proved that our understanding of what's going on there, that the fact that the plant hasn't made a change, it kind of shows that our basic idea that these two processes might balance each other out, that it kind of helps validate that. And so systems thinking provides us a way of keeping track of all of these different things. So you know that one little thing has this causal effect with another. And you know that another little thing has this other causal effect of another. And you put together all of those things together and you get a web of causality, a web of interactions. And hopefully that web tells you something interesting about these interrelationships there. And so what we do in this class is we take the basics of systems thinking and we use them to build models that are behind the scenes. They're going to be calculus-based models, but they're not going to look that way to you, because we're going to use computer-based tools that get rid of this ugly calculus syntax and replace it with something a little bit more friendly, a little bit more that shows things that, if you're familiar with these stocks and flows, so these diagrams where you've got things flowing into other things, and those things then have an opportunity to flow into more things, and we can sort of accumulate all these flows in a way that tells us interesting things about how things change over time. And so that's kind of what we're going to be building up in this class, is how do we take our basic understanding of how things work at a micro scale, collect a bunch of those things together, accumulate them in a computer-based tool, where in the tool you basically say, I know that if I add more nitrogen, this happens. If I add more sunlight, this happens. If I add more water, this happens, and so on and so forth. And after you've accumulated all those things in the tool, the computer-based tool behind the scenes is going to build the calculus for you. It's going to do this work for you. And on top of that, it's going to spit out the graph for you without you having to do all of that ugly calculus work that you've had to learn how to do. So you're not going to, even though once upon a time, this course was called like Calculus 2 for Sustainability or something like that. And we renamed the course System Dynamics and Sustainability to emphasize that it's not really about the calculus in this course, but you got to know that the calculus is going on behind the scenes. But really this course is how do we use calculus type thinking to build models using basic arithmetic and let the computer do the hard calculus work. And then we can then use our kind of faith in that the calculus works, that in order for us to sort of say, well, you kind of know where this might come from, this graph might come from, but then be able to then play with the computer to get different graphs out of here. So we're experimenting with the computer models to get different graphs out. And that allows us to get kind of a better idea of whether our understanding of reality is correct. And if it is correct, at least to some validity threshold, then can we then intervene in our computer-based model in a way that gives us an idea of what would happen if we intervened in the real model. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing this semester. Let me give you a brief example of what something like that might look like. So this is an example I borrowed from Gene Bellinger, who's just somebody who puts together a lot of educational materials about systems thinking. And this is an example of these moose and wolves. And so if you were to bring up this lecture from the Canvas site, and we'll go into all that course policy stuff here in a second, then you can click on one of these, this link or this thing up here, and it will then open up a website, which I'll pull over to the screen where that's being shared. And this sort of sets up a story. So just to see if everybody's awake, can everybody, if you can see this moose and wolves website as opposed to all on top of my PowerPoint presentation. Can you put something in the chat to let me know that everything's that display loop is working? Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, so basically this tool that we're looking here is a tool we're going to learn how to use. It's called Insight Maker. And it is one of these tools that allows you to draw these models that behind the scenes are calculus, but in the foreground don't look at all like calculus. And so, so in this particular story here, someone's trying to understand the population of moose and the population of wolves in an area together and how they might interact. And so what they do is they first end up building a model of how a moose population might grow. And so we're going to learn how what these diagrams mean over time. But this is something that by the end of the class, you'll be able to draw. And this box basically represents that there is a stock of moose available in a habitat. And those moose will grow according to a process we refer to as moose births. And those moose will then decay or die off via a process called moose deaths. And so the balance of births and deaths tells you how much of a moose population you're going to get. And so if you just simulate one of these things, which is equivalent to asking the computer to do the calculus for you, then what it does is it'll generate a graph like this one. And this graph shows you exponential growth. This is what's going to happen whenever the birth rate is greater than the death rate. You just get moose that just grows and grows and grows. You get an unlimited number of moose. Now, that on itself, when we look at that, doesn't make any sense. We know that there's going to be a period of time where you're going to get more and more moose available. But eventually, we think that that's probably, trees don't grow to the sky. Eventually, this stops. So that tells us right now, just by looking at that graph, that our understanding of how the moose population works probably is missing something. And so that tells us we need to go back to the model and add in whatever we're missing. So one thing we're missing is the wolf population. So let's see if we can simulate the wolf population. We can use a similar module to simulate a wolf population. We have a stock of wolves in a habitat, and we're going to learn how to build all of this. So you're not supposed to know how to do any of this so far. This is just what you're going to know how to do coming out of this class. And so you're going to build a diagram like this, and behind the scenes, you're going to learn that this actually is identical to something you could write down as a calculus expression, but you're not going to have to write the calculus. You just draw the diagrams, and the computer does the hard work for you. And so this, again, has births and deaths coming in, and we can simulate the wolf population. Here, we've got the wolf birth rate happens to be lower than the wolf death rate. And so these wolves start out at a population of 100, and then they decay, they drop over time. And so that's telling us that, well, I can see that, I guess it's good that when births are low that I get a decay, but I know that wolves have reached a steady state, that there are always wolves and there are always moose, but moose aren't growing forever, and the moose aren't in a perpetual state of decline. So I know that I'm probably missing something. And the thing that I'm missing is the connection between the two. And so what I can do is put the two populations together in one of these models, and I can say the number of moose is going to affect the wolf birth rate. And I can also then go forward and say the number of wolves is going to affect the moose death rate. And so these two things are going to feed back on each other. And so once we learn to properly formally account for these feedbacks, then we'll be able to label this feedback loop and try to understand all of the properties of this feedback loop and what happens when these types of feedbacks show up in systems. But then what we can do is, even before we get to that type of analysis, just simulate the thing. And so I am going to then run a simulation, and now I get a graph that looks totally different. So the green line, it represents the moose population over time, and the blue line represents the wolf population over time. And for this set of parameters, this basically moose birth rate and wolf death rate, and then the interaction of those things, then I get oscillations between these things. So there are periods when the moose are growing quite a bit, But when they grow, they eventually become so plentiful that they become easy pickings for the wolves. And so then the wolves can grow really fast. Now, once there are lots of wolves, then that greatly depletes the moose population, which brings them down. Now, as the moose population gets low, it becomes harder for wolves to find food. And so that creates a lagging effect where then the wolves then have a decline in their population. And this process repeats. And so now we can see that when we put predator and prey together, then they have a mutual inhibition on each other where they can regulate their own population to some sort of steady state value, where it's true that at the instant of time, one's going to be rising, the other one's going to be declining. But if we were to zoom out and look at time at a larger time scale, you would always have moose and you would always have the predator wolf. And so that understanding of saying, well, okay, we know basically how basic reproductive physiology works at the level of a single animal, and we know that certain animals eat other animals. Those basic small scale causal connections allowed us to build this much more complex model. And then that gave us much more complex dynamics that we could then go into better understanding. So those are the types of things that we're trying to understand. Now, you might look at that and say, you know, I've seen this diagram before, and I kind of knew about these oscillations. That's not that exciting. Do I really need a fancy computer simulation to do that? And this is just like a basic model. If I go back, you know, the beauty of systems thinking is it helps us think about even larger problems and even larger models. And so I'm going to borrow another example from Bellinger, and this is a bird feeder dilemma, he calls it. And so this, in this particular example, where we're not going to go, we're just going to sort of draw out these causal links, then I am going to open up this example, also an insight maker, but this one is going to be focused on these so-called causal loops. And so here we got the bird feeder dilemma that's opening. And so in this particular example, this is modeling. I'm not going to worry about the dynamics so much, but just all of the things that could cause other things to try to show us that even if we think we understand a system, once we really push our way through all of the little things we think we understand, we can see that the bigger picture is something that we don't understand, and that's why we need these quantitative tools. So in this particular case, this is modeling someone who looks out their window and they say, you know what, I see birds outside my window, and that makes me feel good. I have a pleasant morning when I see birds outside the window. So what do? Well, then you might say that I would like to increase the number of birds outside my window. And so if I were, you know, you could say, well, how am I going to do that? Well, maybe I am going to buy a bird feeder. So I've been encouraged to buy a bird feeder. So from that bird feeder, that I do notice that that is going to increase the number of birds at the feeder. So, and pardon me a second, I just want to toggle back to PowerPoint to get rid of a notification that's getting rid of my mouse. All right. So, so this bird feeder that I've just bought, that's great, you know, right? But the problem is, so it's great. It improves my morning. But the problem with bird, and it also increases the attractiveness of my garden. Maybe I bought a really aesthetically pleasing bird feeder. Excellent. So I got birds and the bird feeder. Everything's wonderful. What could go wrong? But eventually, I see that, and also my pleasant morning, I see that it actually reduces my amount of frustration. And that frustration, if I had frustration, it would take away from my pleasant morning. So there's a feedback loop here that suggests that things are going to get better and better and better for me. So what I obviously am getting excited about here is we know that eventually something's going to go wrong, right? So, and that thing that's going to go wrong is that this, in order to keep birds at the feeder, I'm going to need to buy bird seed. So this buying of bird seed, in order to do that, that is going to add to my frustration. You know, and you could, it doesn't have to be a bird feeder. It could be if your child says, I really would like a tarantula. And you think, oh, that's great, that's fine. So I'll buy a tarantula, how bad could that be? And then you're like, well, every week I'm gonna have to buy crickets for that tarantula, or a hermit crab, or, you know, now you gotta clean tanks and all these sort of things. These maintenance things are things you usually don't think of at the initial instant you buy the hermit crab, the tarantula, the bird feeder. And so this bird feeder buying the bird seed actually adds to frustration. So the bird feeder was supposed to effectively get rid of my frustration, but now the bird feeder has a secondary path to increasing my frustration. So then this keeps going. My bird feeder increases spillage, which means that I'm going to have to buy more bird seeds. So the more birds I get, the more spillage I get, which means the bird seed's not being used as effectively. It's also going to attract squirrels. The squirrels are going to decrease the birds at feeder, but they're probably also going to increase the spillage, and so on and so forth. So basically, once I go through all of this, I find that I get this ugly web of causality where it is not completely clear whether the intervention that I suggested, buying a bird feeder, actually improves the situation. So on a small scale, if you only look at one causal link, you can tell whatever story you want to tell. You say to somebody, don't buy a bird feeder, you're going to have to buy all that bird seed. Well, then you're emphasizing just the negative part of it. You can say, yeah, buy a bird feeder. It's wonderful to see all of the particular types of birds that are coming to the bird feeder, and it's going to be great. You're emphasizing another part of the story. When you put those things together, just like in the wolves and the moose together, you find out the story is a little more complicated, and it's going to depend on the particular parameters. But if we were to build a calculus-based model of this thing, it would be so ugly that even if you had the mathematical chops to work through on paper a couple of small scale examples, at this scale, you pretty much, you wouldn't even be able to solve it by hand. So you'd have to resort to using a computer anyway. So our approach is to say, we're not afraid of these ugly diagrams. We are going to draw the diagrams from a dynamical systems perspective inside a computer program and let the computer program do all the ugly math. And we can then play with the parameters, play with the different types of interventions, look at the graphs and experiment with the graphs the same way we would experiment with a real system in the real world. That's what we're learning to do during SOS 212 this semester. And my claim is that once we do learn to do all of these things, that's going to actually hit 4 out of the 5 of the so-called core sustainability competencies. And so these, if you go to the sustainability website and you say, you go to the bachelor's degree in sustainability, you say, what will you learn? And we talk a lot about these competencies, which sort of define what it means to study sustainability. And these 5 competencies are systems thinking, futures thinking, values thinking, strategic thinking, and collaborative competency. And my claim is that in SOS 212, we actually cover all of those except for values thinking, that we are going to have you, systems thinking is kind of the biggie here, but we are going to give you tools for making plans, for thinking about how things will change in the future. So we will able to actually hit this kind of strategic and futures idea. And on top of that, it is my claim that these computer-based tools are going to give you another communication perspective. So not only are you going to have to put together a final project where you're going to build one of these models and present on it, but the model itself becomes a tangible toy to allow multiple people to come together and share their own personal experience about a system and understand other people's personal experience, and then play together in a sandbox where they can build more shared understanding. And so it's my claim that this class hits particularly hard on systems thinking and collaborative competency, but also hits these other 2 as well. So that's kind of the basic topic overview. I'm now going to go into the course policies, but I want to take a pause to ask for any questions about those examples that we just went through there. Whenever I ask for questions, I like to put up this formal question slide here. If you would like to ask me questions during any of the class, you can, of course, raise your hand. You can unmute your microphone. You can put something in the chat. I try to watch the chat continuously as if it's sort of raising of a hand. Or if you don't want to, if you want a more anonymous way to provide to give questions, then you can go to this website down here, and that'll open up a meeting pulse room where you can put in anonymous questions that I will do my best to monitor during the class. And if you see other people's questions, they can vote on those questions and vote them up or down. And if I don't get to a question during the class, then I will do my best to post an answer on the discussion board and on Slack after the class once I get a chance to take care of it. So just to get myself back in the practice of it, I'm going to check the meeting pulse now. There's no questions there, but I'll try to do that throughout the class there. So with that, I also like to take at least 30 seconds to kill time, because there was a study that showed that that students generally don't work up the courage to ask a question until you give them about 30 seconds. So this explanation was me stalling, just in case you do have any questions. So are there questions, comments, concerns before we get into the policy stuff?
I have a question about course structure.
Yeah, I'll get into that in the next couple of slides. So can we
Okay.
hold off for just a second and then feel free to come back after?
Yeah, no problem.
Excellent. Any other questions about the basic stuff so far?
Yeah, and this might be something more having to do with the values part, what you're saying we don't discuss, but in that, for example, the bird feeder scenario, for the purposes of our analysis, are we going to need to be concerned with like what the desirable result is, as far as like what will be, if it's a viable means to accommodate that? Like, say for instance, we didn't necessarily want the great morning, but we wanted an aesthetically pleasing garden, for example, that might have a different requirement of actions.
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. And so, yeah, this class is about learning how to use tools to answer a wide variety of questions. And so if someone comes with you and says, they might ask you that, they might say, this is my objective. I want to know the best way to achieve that objective. And you can then use these tools to try to build a model to better address that objective. And what that objective is unclear. In economics, we sometimes talk about positive economics versus normative economics. And so the positive economics has to do, and this isn't a class on economics, I just bring this up. So positive economics is when you use economic models to just describe things how they are. So how do I use mathematical models to sort of say, why are things the way they are? And so it's very objective. Whereas normative economics is economics to say, I would like things to be this way. I would like to come up with an economic way to get people to stop putting greenhouse gases into the air. How can I get people to stop doing that? And then you can use positive economics for that. But economics is in both of those terms. Likewise, you can use these tools. So if you were to go into your final project, which I'll talk about here in a minute, you could say, we want to build a model that will help us achieve this goal. Or you can say that we already noticed that this thing is happening. We want to build a model to understand this thing that's already happening. So I know COVID is on everybody's mind. This is an excellent class. Like all of those models you've heard about where people talk about R0 and RT and infectiousness of different strains of COVID, those use models that you're going to learn how to build in this class. And so you can imagine asking just generally, what's going to happen if a more infectious strain of COVID enters the United States? Well, you could build a model to answer that question. Or you could try to build a model to say, how do I convince people to actually use more of the vaccine or volunteer to get vaccinated? You could build models to do that. So exactly what you want to do with these models is up in the air. What we talk about in this class is just how to build these models. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
All right. And yeah, there was a question in the chat about the Canvas site. And yeah, I hadn't, so they got rid of spring break this semester, as you know, which meant changing a bunch of due dates in a way that normally Canvas nicely moves all your due dates for you. But when they just chop out a week, Canvas isn't smart enough to do that. And so that, along with some other changes I made, have taken me a little bit longer to get the Canvas site up to the spring 2021 standards. And so it took me a little bit longer. I apologize for that. But you all should see the Canvas site now, and it looks a little bit like this. All of the stuff that you possibly need for this course is on Canvas. I also use Slack to post just as an alternate modality, but generally anything important should be available on Canvas. Right here on the front page of Canvas, you've got the link to our current room that we're in. If you need to know how to get into office hours, there's a link to the instructional staff and office hours that has Eric and my information on it and when you can reach us and how. If you want to watch a recorded lecture like this lecture, or you happen to not come to class today, and I'll talk about the policy for that in a second, then you can hit that right from this main page. This captured classroom recordings will bring you right there. So synchronous, asynchronous, and how to get in contact with us otherwise. Over in the nav bar in Canvas, the modules is where kind of the major parts of this course are. So if you're looking for things, there's some good stuff under assignments, but generally you can find almost everything that you're going to need for this course under modules. So that's where I hope you'll focus your attention. For connecting with us or your other classmates, then I recommend taking a look at the Canvas discussions. Feel free to post questions there. I will try to post answers to questions there, tips for homework, things like that. There's also a Slack workspace I've set up that's kind of doubles as a discussion board. There's this chat where you can chat with other students, say group mates and things like that once you form your groups for your final project. And then people, and that should allow you to connect to find out who else is in the class and reach out to those people as well. And so those are kind of the main areas there. If we flip over to modules, there's a lot in there. And so what I encourage you to do is hit this, smash this collapse all button up here, and that will collapse all the modules into their sections. And it's going to be much more readable and easier to manage here. And when we do that, we can see that the modules are kind of split up, where all of the course information, office hours, syllabus, etc., are up here under this course policies. Then if you need asynchronous access to the course, you've got it under the classroom recordings. There is this special module that has one assignment in it here that's basically a syllabus quiz that you'll need to complete in order to unlock the rest of the course. Now, caveat, because I've made some changes to course policies, I am still in the process of updating that quiz. It will be available later today, and then you'll be able to complete that thing. You can complete it as many times as you want. It takes the highest score. Once you complete and get all the questions right, then it unlocks the rest of the course. It'll be available for about until at least Sunday. All right, then the major assignment categories, and I'll go over the course structure here in a second, but if you need to find an assignment by its name, like, oh, I need to know where the homeworks are, they're all stored up here at the top. And so you can easily find all the homework assignments in the homework module, all the readings in the reading module, all these Muddiest points I'll talk about, and this Muddiest point module, etc. These are all up here. But I've also put them in another spot as well. And so there are units, unit A through I think F for this course, as well as a midterm unit and a final exam unit. And I've just peppered in interleaving everything together around the lectures. And so you could say, all right, this is lecture A1. So that means I'm going to find it in unit A, and any assignments associated with unit A will be also in this unit A module down here. Same with unit B and so on. And so you can find them up here, but you can also find them interleaved with the lectures down here. So you're kind of in two places. If we zoom in on the course information module, again, instructional staff and office hours, that's where you find my office hours link and Eric's office hours. That's where you find our Zoom links for our office hours offices, our Zoom offices, and so on. If you need to get in contact with us, email is preferred. Canvas messaging is okay, although it's a little wonky on how it notifies. But when you send the email, please, please, please prefix your emails with SOS 212. And then it's nice to have some sort of concise summary of why you're emailing, and then you can put all the details you want in the email. That helps me find your emails and then zoom in on them so that I can get back to you within a very short period of time. I get a lot of other emails from my grad students, from spam, from mailing lists, from committees, and so a lot of those things can sit a little bit longer, but I want to make sure I get back to you in a timely manner, and you can help me with that by putting SOS 212 in the subject of your messages. So that's very helpful. If you have questions about things that were graded by hand, all of the hand grading, except for a few special cases, will be done by Eric. And so it's a good idea to email him either him directly, and if there's an issue, then he can loop me in or email the both of us. That's fine too. If you email me about, say, a homework grading thing, I will have to check in with Eric anyway, and so I'll end up looping Eric in anyway. And so it'll just save a step if you email Eric directly. You can carbon copy me, that's fine, or just email Eric directly, and so he can then address, okay, this is why you got these points off, or this is what we were expecting, and so on. Yeah, so syllabus, you can find that there in the course information module. If you're interested in how the lectures are organized, I put a tentative schedule of all of the lecture activities. That includes non-lecture lecture activities as well. So open labs to help us work on homeworks or to help us work on the final projects. Those are peppered in there as well. So you can kind of see what we're planning on doing that day. The course textbook, I've got links to it. There is a required textbook for this course, but you don't have to buy it. If you want a paper copy, go ahead, that's fine, but it's available from the library, and I've also made it available on Canvas. So it's easy to get to, and that's a quick link to it. If you're interested in honors contracts, sometimes I'll get a lot of questions about that. Hit this link first, and I give you info about what I'd kind of be looking for honors contracts for this course. There's a bunch of other info and basics on how to use Canvas. I find a lot of students aren't familiar with the what if grades. So it turns out if you go into the grade book, if there's a grade that hasn't been given to you yet for an assignment, you can actually click on that grade and change it to a hypothetical grade, and Canvas will recalculate your grade as if you got that grade. So that way it gives you a way to say, well, how well am I doing right now? I don't know how well I'm doing on homework A4 or homework F2, but assuming I get 70% or higher, what's that going to do to my grade? Well, you can then experiment with that. So that tells you how to do those what if grades down here. I mentioned we use Insight Maker. We also use a program called VinSim, and you can find information on how to get VinSim and Insight Maker down here. So click on that, it'll show you where to download them or how to create an account. The other than big one I want to open up here is readings on the Canvas module. And so there's, as I'll talk about in a second, there are readings that are associated with certain lectures. So for example, lecture A3 has reading chapter 1 of the textbook associated with it. And so there's 15% of your course grade is associated with readings, 5% to perusal assignments, 5% to reading exercises, and 5% to these reading assessments. And there are drops in there as well. And so we drop your lowest and then a certain number of these, and that's shown on the syllabus. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But to find all of those reading exercises, again, you can go into readings. If you hit the reading chapter 1 here, then there will be a link to launch perusal. And Perusal, if you haven't used it, is a website outside of Canvas that has the readings loaded into it. And I will have annotated some of your chapters, and some of the chapters may not have many annotations for me, but allows you to read through the chapter, and it will keep track of where you're reading. And then it also allows you to make annotations. And so you can click on things and say, this didn't make sense to me, or I really think this is interesting, or et cetera, et cetera. And then you'll also be able to see other students' annotations, and then you can respond to those. You can say, yeah, I thought that was an interesting point too, or I can understand how you got confused there. Here's what my answer to that would be. And Perusal uses a special algorithm that gives you points for not only reading the chapter, but making these annotations. And you get full credit on Perusal for a combination of a lot of those things. And so the algorithm is a little funny, and it's part of the pedagogy to not tell you exactly how the algorithm works. But this is my first semester. I'm trying Perusal. A lot of other instructors say they really like it and have gotten good feedback from students, so we're giving it a shot. So you find the Perusal assignments from these reads up here. While you're reading the chapter, I also have created these Canvas exercises. These are short exercises for you to complete at home, do the night before the associated lecture. And they basically ask you the questions that focus you on what I think are the most important parts of the chapter that I want you to make sure that you have. So you can spend usually an unlimited amount of time up until the due date working, reading through those. And so that way the question might ask a particular thing, and then you can read closely in the chapter and try to find the answer for that. Then there's these things I call reading assessments, which are timed assignments. I think, and these will be online on Canvas, and I think they're about 30 minutes or anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. And these are, again, timed ones. I don't have you do respondus or anything like that, but before the class starts, you have to have them completed. And they're a quick way to test how well you comprehended the material when you're not able to very just quickly and flip through it. And so each chapter has all three of those, has a perusal assignment, which just sort of tracks that you read the assignment, a reading exercise, which gives you a couple of questions to look out for as you're reading through the assignment, and a reading assessment to do after you've read it, which is a timed assignment to take to test your comprehension. And that's due just before that lecture starts. Then in the units themselves, at the top of every unit, there is a study guide. And so a lot of people say, they say, when it comes to the midterm, what do I need to know? Well, for every unit that the midterm covers, or units A through D, you can go to the Unit A study guide, and inside the Unit A study guide, it'll tell you the things that I think you should know for that unit. Unit F study guide, same sort of thing. So you can click on these study guides to find out what you should know coming out of that unit. And then, as I mentioned, that inside these units, I've interleaved all of that assignment material plus auxiliary material just to help you if you need more information, all structured around the lectures. And so that's there if you need it. All right, so that's basically how to use Canvas. I will talk about the actual course, how the points are divvied out in a couple of slides here. I've basically already outlined the course objective here and the expected learning outcomes. The way we are going to try to achieve those outcomes is by structuring the material this way, where we've got 4 units that basically take us from systems thinking to these causal loop diagrams to a basic introduction to the numerical simulation of dynamical systems. And those 4 units, then you'll cap that off with a midterm over those. And then after the midterm, we then start using those models that we're using, those techniques that we learned before the midterm, to build more complicated models. Things like models of disease spread, things like models of innovations as they spread through human society. How quickly do people take up an idea like recycling? Things like modeling oil dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. So we will go into case studies and more examples of how to build up all of the tools that we learned about before the midterm into more complex models after the midterm. And then we'll have a final exam, which will be comprehensive over all of this stuff. The prereqs for this, I've mentioned a lot of calculus, and so I want you to have taken a calculus course, but I am not going to make you do a lot of integration or derivations or anything, but I want you to be able to recognize a derivative, recognize an integral. And again, all of the hard math will be done by the computer, but you still know that the hard math exists and is going on behind the scenes. The more important skills for this course will be basic algebra skills and graphing skills. So understanding how to read a graph, how maybe to make a graph. Those sorts of things, because these computer-based tools are going to be spitting out a lot of graphs. So graphs are going to kind of be the lingua franca of this class. All right, the required course materials I mentioned, you can buy the textbook, but it's also available for free in electronic form from the library. I've also mentioned that there are a number of lectures like this lecture F1 that are associated with chapters. Make sure you read the chapter the night before that lecture, and to help you, motivate you to do that, then there's the perusal assignment, the reading exercise, and the reading assessment. And those can all be found in a number of places under modules. The expected course software, I mentioned we're using Insight Maker and Vensim. These are things that if you're going to come to the in-person lab, will be available on those computers. But they're freely available for you to download onto your computers as well. I've also requested them to be installed on the general computing labs as well, if you'd like to come to those. They are available on macOS, they're available on Windows, and the web-based ones are pretty much available anywhere. So Insight Maker is web-based, Vensim is downloadable, but again, it has a Mac version and a Windows version. We are also will briefly use do some simulation inside spreadsheets. So having access to Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets will be necessary. Both of those are freely available to ASU students and also available on the in-person machines as well as the lab machines. All right, so before I actually talk about the course structure, are there any questions about that material? In a pretty boring class today. Apologize for that, but got to get through it. I hope everybody had a good break. All right. So how are things structured? There was a question earlier about course structure, and I'm just going to double check here. All right, no questions at Meeting Pulse. Excellent. So this is the basic structure of how your grade is divvied up. I do these kind of lecture attendance things that I have engineered to actually work both asynchronously and synchronously. So even if you don't come to class, you can still earn attendance credit. And this basically, I'll talk about this here in more detail and actually do an example of these. So you will get attendance credit for this lecture, but I provide kind of random survey questions throughout a lecture that you will then have the ability to electronically respond to. And then I will then take all of those electronic responses after the lecture. I don't grade them for correctness, but I do look for coherence. Do these answers make sense? And if all of your answers are coherent, then you will get credit for attending that lecture. And for asynchronous individuals, I will post the lecture video once it's done processing, and then you get 24 hours after it's posted to do the attendance assignments. And so if you're in a different time zone, or if you just couldn't make it to class that day, you can still participate, but you've only got that 24 hours. So that keeps everybody kind of in lockstep with the class, even if you're not coming to the in-person class. So that's kind of all that I'm saying here, is that now the modification for that for ASU Sync is that if you don't want to come to the in-person class, you don't have to get approval from me. And so I just want to emphasize that. You can take this class however you're most comfortable taking this class. If that means doing it asynchronously, waiting for my lecture videos and watching them after they're posted, that's fine. If that means coming to class in Zoom, that's fine. If it's some mixture of those, that's fine. If you want to come in person, where Eric will be there and he'll set up the Zoom and he can help you in the in-person assignments as well as me as well, that's fine. You can, again, mix and match those however you wish. You don't need to get a permission ahead of time. There's no prior approval needed. You don't need to tell me which one you're going to do which ways. It is totally up to you. I really like this platform, this ASU Sync platform, and I will try to make use of it as effectively as I can, and I will try to be as flexible as I can to your needs. So, but as I mentioned, if you do decide to do asynchronous attendance or asynchronous, then you still, within 24 hours after the video gets posted, then you need to do those attendance exercises. But note that there is a drop policy. I think I drop your 5 lowest scores. So, you know, out of the however many times, whatever, 30 times that there are lectures, if you don't happen to miss a couple of them, then it's not going to make a big deal. So what does an attendance exercise look like? It looks like this. Oh, okay, I see a question in the chat. So I'll leave this up, and if you want to go to that URL, I will give you an attendance question here in a second, but I'm going to take a look at this question in the chat. Is there any chance I'd include the time of posting when the posting asynchronous lecture, because sometimes it's hard to know the exact 24-hour time period? That's a great question. At least initially, I can post announcements to say, oh, by the way, the lecture is now posted. But over time, rather than spamming everyone's mailbox, usually the Zoom cloud lectures for me get processed within, say, an hour after the end of the class, and then after I should have a link to the Zoom cloud lectures available, even if I usually put multiple forms online just in case a cloud-based service isn't working. Even though the other versions may not be processed yet and ready to be available, the Zoom cloud version should be available. And so it would be really, really rare for the lectures not to be available by, say, 10 o'clock that night. So so I would say that you pretty much have let's say if a lecture is on Tuesday, you pretty much have all of Wednesday to handle it. And in reality, I'm not going to be a real stickler to this 24-hour policy unless it looks like somehow people are abusing it. If you can hit the attendance questions before the next lecture, you're probably going to be fine. So that's really the spirit of it, is I want you to do the attendance questions for every lecture before the start of the next lecture. But I put the 24 hours policy in there just to make sure everybody's kind of paying attention. All right. And I see that someone had a question, but it got answered. So great. All right, so the attendance exercise. So let's do one of these attendance exercises. You can smash that link, or if you want to, if you got a QR code, I'll actually put the link in the chat. And so you can click on the link that's in the chat. Oh, sorry, I put the wrong link. That was a typo. So that link right there. You can either click the link that's in the chat, you can go to the QR code, and the attendance question that I'm going to ask right now is, do you have to inform me if you want to attend in person? So that's my attendance question for right now. So attendance question 1, do you have to inform the instructor if you are going to attend in person? And so if you go to that link, there will be 10 answer spots. Go to question 1 and put your answer there and just leave it sit there. Don't hit submit until the end of class. And so I can answer a couple of other, or I can ask you a couple of others. And then, so the second one, you'll just put in spot 2. The third one, you'll put in spot 3. And that might be all we have. You'll hit submit at the end of class, and that will then be your attendance question for the day. All right, any questions about that? Does that make sense? So go to the link, answer that attendance question. Don't hit submit. Hit submit at the end of class. All right. Okay. What if, oh, and there's a question. What if you get it wrong? These are graded for completion or coherence and not correctness. So if I ask you, like, which one of these is correct, A, B, C, or D, and you say yes, then in that case, I'm like, well, it just looks like you just put in a random answer there. I'm not going to give you credit for that. But if you give me A, B, C, or D, it doesn't matter to me if it's right. It just has to be an appropriate answer, a coherent answer to the question I asked. Attendance questions are not a way for me to take credit away from you from not understanding. They're a way for me to foster further discussion and to give you an opportunity to really practice things in a very low stakes way. You get it wrong, that's not going to affect it. As long as you're answering the question, you're going to get credit. All right. Any other questions about that? Great. All right, the other way that I get feedback from you is through these Muddiest point reflections. And so you've got one coming up here due Sunday. These are short assignments that are collected on Canvas, and they're due Sunday of every week. And so in each one, when you go to the Muddiest point for that week, I ask you 3 questions. I ask you, what was your clearest topic from this week? What was the least clear or muddiest topic from this week? And what's an interesting topic you'd like to hear more about? The first 2 questions, I'm only looking for, you could give me a couple of words, you could give me a phrase, a sentence would be great. Some people give me a paragraph, and that's fine. But if all you want to put is a couple words in there, that's fine. I just want you to take an inventory of all of the topics that you've learned that week and just tell me what's at the top of that inventory is the clearest and what's at the bottom of that inventory. Some of you are going to say every topic from this week was clear. I have no confusion about every topic. That's great, but I still want you to tell me what's your least clear. Of all of the clear topics that you've learned this week, what's the one you had the most trouble with, or you think is kind of the most difficult thing to understand? I want you to tell me that in that second answer to the Muddiest points. And then for the last one, it may be that you say, you know what, I understood the topics from at least, but I'm not really that interested. I don't want to learn anything more about those particular topics. Then you can just put an NA in the third one, not applicable, and that's fine. And so, and I will do my best then every week to read through everyone's muddiest points. And if I have time, respond individually to everyone. And if I don't have time, if there are common things that come up across students, then I'll respond in a discussion post or in the next lecture or on Slack, trying to address those things that came up across a large number of students. So those are the muddiest points. Then there are the reading activities that I already talked about. These are broken up into 3 parts: the perusal, which allows you to read through the chapter, the exercises, which give you kind of some key questions to focus on, and then the Canvas assessments, which are timed assignments that are due before the lecture. That they're timed again, so there might be anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, it'll say for those assignments, and then those allow me to sort of test your comprehension of that material. So these first 2, the perusal and the Canvas exercises, are due the night before the associated lecture. The assessment is due the time of the lecture. So if the lecture is at 3, as it is, then you're expected to start that assignment, if it's a 30-minute assignment, by 2:30. And then that way you'll have that 30-minute window done by the time the lecture starts. But you can take them much earlier. You can take these several days beforehand. I will tell you that for the first couple of assignments, the last time I taught this course was spring 2020, so where we were, half in COVID, half out. And so the bottom half of these assessments, which used to be given in class, have already been digitized and put on the Canvas. The top half, I'm currently going through and digitizing. And so it'll only take me a second to digitize the last of them. But that first one currently still needs to be turned into a Canvas activity. But this exercise is already available, and the perusal is already available for that first chapter, which will be due, I think, a week from today, so next Tuesday. Then there's homework assignments. There are a couple of these. And again, there's a drop policy for each one of these. I didn't put the exact drop policy here because sometimes I increase it throughout the semester a little bit to kind of find the sweet spot. So, the reading assignments, there is a drop policy. I think you drop it the lowest one of each one of these. So if you miss some of these, then they just get dropped. It's no big deal. Homework assignments, again, I think there's a drop 1 on the homework assignments. These are opportunities for you to practice at home with the tools that we learn to use in class. But I usually give you time in class to start them. And so, I'll be around and the TA will be around as you start working on those. And so we've got one of those coming up, I think, starting on Thursday. And then the midterms. So I'm trying a slightly new structure for the midterms this semester and the final exam. So both of these tests are worth 15% of your grade, and they're set up as a so-called 2-stage exam. And so what that means is on Thursday, let's say the midterm week, Thursday of that midterm week, we're going to have stage 1, which will mean we will not have lecture that day. This is the ASU Sync side of it. We don't have lecture that day. So you get 24 hours that day to start stage 1 using Respondus Lockdown Browser with Monitor. And you'll get 90 minutes for a test that was designed for 75 minutes. I throw in an extra 15 for technical challenges. And then you take that individually using one sheet of 2-sided handwritten formula sheet. And that will contribute to 80% of your exam. Then once you finish, you're done. I don't give you your score. I don't give you a solution set. But then what happens then on Tuesday of the next week, again, no lecture, but you get the exact same test. But at this point, it's open book and open notes, and you can collaborate with other students in the current class this semester. And so you can be thinking about your answers and talking to each other over the weekend to say, this one I thought was kind of hard. You could write down what answers you took down from the Thursday test. And then on Tuesday, you can come back together and you can even work on the exam together. You'll have 24 hours. It won't be timed. You'll just have to turn it in during that Tuesday period. And so you can work on some of it in the morning, some of it in the afternoon, some of it in the evening. You can change your answers. So Tuesday, you'll be basically trying to score the last 20% of your exam. So those two will be combined together to give you your total exam score. So there's 80% individual and 20% group. I do that for both the midterm and the final. So that means that the final exam, stage 1 will be given not during finals week. It'll be given during the last week of classes, that Thursday of the last week of classes. And then Tuesday of finals week, then you'll have the group version. So during finals week will actually be stage 2 of this exam. And then so both exams, in order to fit into the class period, are designed for 75-minute time windows. So I know that's a little bit weird, but it, hopefully that makes sense. And so again, the ASU Sync version of this is we're going to use Respondus for stage 1, but stage 2 you don't use Respondus. Stage 2 it's just open book, open notes. You can't use other websites, but it's kind of on the honor code. But you can use your peers, and you can use the Canvas website. So are there questions about this 2-stage exam? I know that's a little bit weird, but I'm hoping it allows you an opportunity to have a little less anxiety about the exam and score some points while also learning something from each other. Okay. All right, and then the last big thing that we have is a final project. It's a group project. So mid-semester, you are going to be forming groups of, say, 3 or 4 people. There is a document on Canvas that has more details about the group project, but basically, as a group together, you will be building a system dynamics model of something that hopefully is relevant to sustainability. And so you imagine could be, something to do with energy use in a city as the city grows, for example, or it could be nutrient cycling, or it could be something to do with COVID even. So, we're going to learn about the SIR model, which is a model you might have heard about or heard in the news. And so you could say, well, what if you vaccinate people, but even though they're not getting sick, they're still infectious? How can we model that? Well, you could add, you could build a model for that. And so those are sorts of things that I've had people, back when I taught this in spring of 2020, they modeled the toilet paper supply chain using a system dynamics model to try to understand how you could run out of toilet paper and how long the queues would get and those sorts of things. So these are all kinds of examples of things that you might model as a group. That'll be a group project that will culminate in a video presentation that you upload to Canvas. So you don't give the presentations during class, you'll upload them to Canvas on the Wednesday of the last week of classes. And then you'll also upload a 4-page report on the Wednesday of the last week of classes. Why Wednesday? Because then between Wednesday and Saturday, each individual student will be assigned a random project report and presentation to peer review. And so you'll watch someone else's 10-minute presentation and you'll read someone else's report, and you'll fill out a rubric and provide some constructive commentary anonymously that they then will get a chance to read. And I will base my grades of the presentations and the final reports in part on the peer reviews. So that's how that works. All right, any questions about the course policy stuff before we close out with where we're looking ahead towards? And I hope that answered some of the questions. There was a question earlier about course policy. I don't know if that answered it. All right, I'll take that as a yes. We're all good. Okay, so this is an example where I left an attendance question in the slides, but I'm not going to worry about an attendance question right now. So I'm just going to skip right over this one. So just because they're in the slide deck doesn't mean I'm going to use them. The only other policy level slides here are just the basic policies here on late work, on grade corrections. So you have a week after you get a grade back to get a correction in. So try to, if you wanted to get a correction in, make sure to check it after it's returned to you, as after a week. We can't go back and do a lot of grade changes. That keeps us from having to do a whole lot of grade change requests at the end of the semester. Copyright stuff, don't upload any of the stuff you get from this class to Chegg or anywhere else. Don't download stuff, don't sell your notes, don't post assignments, and so on. Follow whatever the modality is for the assignments we're working on. So individual assignments, whatever you submit should represent your individual work. It should not be copied from someone else's work. That goes for group assignments. It should be your group's work, not copied from some other groups. And then the standard text here about academic integrity, plagiarism, strongly prohibited. Title IX, myself and a TA are mandated reporters, and so we're obligated to report any information that we're made aware of. But if you do need to report something and you are not comfortable with that, ASU Counseling Services can provide more private ways to do that. Students with disabilities, sales. If you need an accommodation, you need extra time or whatever, just contact sales, which used to be called the DRC, and make an accommodation with them, and I'm happy to oblige. Any questions about that? Okay. All right, so in the last, looks like here it's 4:07. So in the last about 8 minutes here of class, I just want to give us a flavor of where we're going. So we've already seen this diagram, which represents that we're using this computer-based calculation tools to help us rapidly experiment with dynamical systems models. And we're using this term models. And so we need to understand what a model is. And so, you know, when people hear the word model, they often think of fashion models. And so a question that if I hadn't gone a little bit, you know, if I picked up the pace a little bit earlier, then I would have liked to have a classroom sort of discussion about, you know, whether these are models and, you know, and if so, why? So I want you to think about that. You know, are these models? And it is my claim that these are models, that a fashion model is a model. Now, why a fashion model is a model has changed over time. Strictly speaking, we refer to these fashion models as being objects that allow us to better envision what fashion looks like than, say, hanging on a hanger. You know, a hanger doesn't really look like a human, so it's not a good model for a human. So I need something that has real shoulders on it. So I'm going to put this on an individual that has real shoulders, and that gives me a better idea that even though I don't have access to that fashion, I can see it on someone who has a physiology that's closer to mine than the hanger. And so it helps me answer a what if question of what if I were to put on that jacket. Problem with that is the assumptions that the thing that you're putting it on is generic. A lot of times it's not. And so we have learned that there is a particular type of person that has tended to be picked to be fashion models. And over time, because we always see those people, they have now become a model for what the normative idea of what people should look like is. And so they have now become a different type of model. And so that is an example of the deleterious use of models, is that you can use models to trick people into buying things or to buying your idea. And you can do it inadvertently by accidentally making wrong assumptions. But if you use them enough, then it actually affects people's mental model of how the world works, and that can then affect their behavior. And so there is a feedback in model building there. And so we'll talk more about that as we move on. It's my claim that this thing that you see in front of you too, a lab rat, or a rat, in this case is a mouse, is a model, is an animal model. So this is an example here where we can't, for ethical reasons, experiment on humans, you know, at least not initially. So we need something that is a stand-in. You know, a coat hanger is certainly not going to work. So we need something with a physiology that's close enough that gives us an idea of what if we were to inject this with a particular vaccine, for example. Now, of course, this you know, has a tail, a long tail, and humans don't have a long tail. So can we trust the mouse model? Just like, can I trust that that jacket is going to look as good on me as it did on him? You know, those are important questions we have to constantly ask, and to figure out when have I reached enough evidence where it's worth for me spending the money on buying the jacket to try on me? And also, when have I reached the point where I can now inject the vaccine into a human to try it on them, now that model the rest of the population? There are other models that you've probably heard about, like there are a wide variety of models of the electron. So there's the Bohr model of the electron here, you might have learned about in high school or in middle school, where it looks like a solar system. And that was used to predict what happens with matter. So we're trying to understand how to think about matter. We say, well, if matter is made up of these little solar systems, then there are certain things we'd predict that would happen if matter would hit each other, for example. And this was pretty good at explaining that until it wasn't. And so there were some small scale predictions that were off on this model. And so Bohr came up with elliptical versions of that, which we don't talk about a lot in class because they did a little bit better, but they didn't do a lot better. And so it was a new model of the electron, but it wasn't really that much better than the original model of the electron, which is why we don't really hear about it. Turned out I need a fundamentally different model of an electron, where there are these clouds, where these clouds take all these different shapes, and that's what you learn about in a modern chemistry class. And if you take a physics course, you might learn about the standard model of elementary particles, and it sort of answers totally different questions from physics. And so and it is compatible with the other models, but they're different as well. So what I'm trying to get here is that pinning down what an electron is seems to be very difficult to do. And the only way we can really make sense of all that is to say, actually, electrons don't exist. Electrons are useful constructs for helping us think about the world. The same way, Newtonian mechanics, so F equals ma, those sorts of things are all wrong. Einstein came around and he said, Newton was all wrong. I can better predict small scale variations in the universe using a completely different framework. And yet, Newtonian mechanics works really well. Planes are flying in the sky, not because of relativistic mechanics, because of Newtonian mechanics. And so these models are useful. And so that's kind of the big thing here, is that we build models to help us gain understanding about the real world before we go and play in the real world ourselves. And actually, reducing realism can increase generalizability because it helps us apply those models to a wider set of phenomena. And so you might have heard this quote, essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. George Box was not criticizing models. He was saying exactly what I just said here, is that we are reducing realism. So models don't have to be right. They just have to tell us useful things. So that's kind of what we're asking here in these models. And so cutting to the end here, the big takeaway that I want you to take away from this lecture is that a good definition of what a model is something that answers a what if question. What if I did this? I don't know. Should I go and do it? Well, let's think about it a little bit, and we can build a model to help us answer that question. And maybe our model is actually a small scale physical experiment that we can answer the question at small scale, and hopefully that scales to a large scale, or at least gives us some evidence that it's worth trying it at a larger scale. So that's the question that models answer. When you hear model, you should think what if. All right. So let's close out here. I don't want to keep you late, and I'm happy to stick around for questions. But looking forward, I will complete your assignment that you need to complete in Unit 0. So go into Unit 0 on Canvas, and I will let you guys know when I've completed that syllabus quiz with some updates for this semester based on ASU Sync. And once that's available, once you complete it, it'll unlock the rest of Canvas. The thing that you need to be worrying about for next week is that before lecture A3, which I guess will be next Tuesday's lecture, you'll want to read chapter 1 of the textbook, which you can already get available. There'll be a perusal assignment, there'll be a reading exercise and a reading assessment all attached to that chapter. Something else that it's good to do before next week is to download VinSim if you'd like it on your own computer and see if you can get it installed, because we are going to introduce causal loop diagrams next week, and VinSim will be the tool that we will start with in learning how to draw these causal loop diagrams. And while you're at it, it's not a bad idea to create an Insight Maker account, a free Insight Maker account, when that link is down here. So the only thing I have for you is just encourage you to stay safe. I would normally do an attendance exercise here, but I don't want to keep you any later than I already have. So I will stick around for questions, and I will leave this thing up here, and that's all I have for you today. So if you have questions, feel free to give them to me. If not, you can feel free to leave. I will end the recording once we're done with questions. And yes, just submit the one question from earlier, the sample question. You can go ahead and hit submit now. Thanks to everybody, and thanks for your patience with me today, and looking forward to the semester. Okay.